Unfortunately, it took me losing everything at a moment in life. And when people hear that, they're like, man, that's really too bad. How did that happen? And yet it is the most wonderful part of my story that I now call my triple PhD, right? Like, I don't want anyone to have my triple PhD and losing everything, but I absolutely want men, women, companies, founders, individuals to realize that one, we're not alone, and two, it's not all the things we chase sometimes, it's the things where we've come from.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Reanimated Stories. I'm your host, Roger from Reanimation Design. And today I have Joe. And Joe is also here in Austin. We had met each other through, again, networking, which is definitely a theme that you'll see through the podcast. And we just started talking. And I'll be honest with you, the networking event that we each other at, it's kind of one of those things where you allow this idea of like, oh, well, maybe I don't necessarily belong in this room. And, maybe I'm not really supposed to be here or anything like that. Not in a negative way, but just more of a like, I don't know if I can hang out with the big dogs. And Joe is definitely a big dog and he has done some amazing things. And Joe's been great to not only kind of bring me into his world, just really humbled by his presence, just his attitude, as well as also the lessons learned. So Joe, I'm really excited to have you on here. So thanks so much for joining me today.
Roger, wonderful that we have the opportunity to meet. If I've been a big dog, I've also been a lone dog on the porch, beat up and dirty too. So I've had the opportunity to see a lot of things for sure. And I'm grateful for that, including meeting you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, it was definitely great. It was through Provisors. And so we were just chatting and talking. We had a couple other great guys that we were chatting, and I was like, I want to talk to Joe afterwards. And so we did, and we had a wonderful conversation. It's really cool hearing what you are doing. And, we were talking briefly before this, about the Avengers, and kind of, I was like thinking like, oh, kind of, with what you're doing and all that, but we'll get to that in a moment. I don't want to get too far ahead, spoil anything. So Joe, go ahead and tell my audience, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. Well, I'd like to think of myself as an elder, but most people would think of me as older. Elder connotates some wisdom. I'm not sure I always have that, but it's hard to tell a long 30 plus year history in a short minute. But I would, what I'm probably most interested in sharing is, and you mentioned the Avengers, right? Is we're all on this journey and we all have these gifts and abilities, and sometimes it just takes time for those to come out, right? If you watch the Avengers, sometimes they don't even believe in their own superpowers. And I'm like, holy cow, I just blew something up. Like, wow, how did I do that, right? So a lot of my story is related to that, right? We all come from where we come from. And I was originally born on the south side of Chicago in a Eastern European immigrant neighborhood. And so I have a real affection for a lot of the people in this country. And I was built on a lot of great people who came here and did great things. I was fortunate enough to be, I didn't choose who I was born into. I was born in a family of entrepreneurs. And so one side of my family owned the corner tavern, which is the business in a small immigrant neighborhood. And the other started the first savings and loan, which was the bank. And so that and the church and the grocery store pretty much covered the neighborhood. And so I got to see firsthand as a child or a young boy, how they interfaced and listened to people and had compassion for people. And no matter what the problem was, it was drowning in their beers after a bad day at work, or needing a loan to buy a house, right? Or their first car. I got to see some really cool things in my background, and that's really foundational in even what I do today, because I learned that the most important person in the room is the person across the table or across the bar or across the desk or on the other side of the Zoom call, right? Because everyone has that superpower and what they love to do, their passions and their gifts, right? The things we've talked about. And so what I love to listen and learn as I meet people like you and anyone in my life is, all right, where are their passions? Their God-given passion. They wake up in the morning. What is that? And then what is their gifting? And, I made a lot of choices that I did that weren't really my gifting or passion, but it took me time to figure that out. Like, I didn't do very well in high school. I'm not an academic. I'm not good at writing, reading, or arithmetic. That kind of knocks me out of the academic field. But I'm not a dummy. I have the ability to solve problems and do cool things, but just not reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? So I had to find my own way through that process. And as I did that, I realized that, I had to learn different skills and ability despite some of those people would call adversity. I call them strengths, right? Because I have different set of things that are not those. So that landed me getting a job at GE and G Capital back in the original Jack Welch days when they were an amazing company, and got a job in their financial management program, which was, I didn't know how difficult it was to get that job, but I didn't know any better. And I just showed up with tenacity, grit, and wanted to serve the recruiter who was there. And he liked my attitude and my grit and my willingness to kind of force my way into the interview process. So spent a lot of my first doing accounting, finance. I had a mentor who said, Joe, get all that training you can. You can always come back and work for me in real estate and do other things, which I really loved. I had my real estate license when I was 20, but he said, go get all that training. And I did not want all that training in accounting and finance. I mean, if you want to talk about reading, writing, method, like let's talk about worksheets and at that time calculators, like not who I am. But hey, it was more of the story, but that path of learning and growth and realizing, even though it wasn't the gifting, it was very valid and helpful to help other people. And so I stayed on that path until eventually, as we talked, I cold called Michael Dell because I was in a position to look at opportunities to expand GE Capital. And I said, well, it'd be great if we could partner with Dell. And so I did. And I didn't know any different. I was 29 years old, and Michael's the same age as I am. So that ended up being in Austin, Texas, and had a lot of history through that process. But it was an exciting journey just in the beginning part of my career. And that's been kind of this navigational learning, being an older of, I don't have to love what I'm doing now, but I can learn something. And then I'm learning could help other people. And that's a posture I take today. And by the Avengers, as we talked about, it's important. We all have those gifts and superpowers.
Yeah, I think that that's really cool. There's a couple of things that stuck out to me as you were talking. One, I love this idea, as you were saying, the bar and the church and the grocery store. Really, it was just these few things. But the thing that stuck out is that it's like, well, we're going to go there and we're going to listen to what they're saying. And the most important person, right, is a person that's across from you. And a lot of times, we go into the conversation of like, okay, how can I get ready for whatever's next, right? That I can, react instead of respond. And I think that that's a really crucial thing. And I can see how that's also kind of served you in that idea of like, okay, how can I serve the person across from me in order that we can both grow and look at ourselves, like you mentioned, like the Avengers, how we can grow and use, because where I may be strong, you may not be as strong, or we may have different ideas. And when we talk about it, it's like, oh, those ideas actually could work together just from different angles. And where I'm weak, you're strong, and vice versa. So that's really great. Something else that you had mentioned about, like, well, you were 28 and you just called Dell, right? You called Michael Dell because you didn't know any better. And that's really interesting, because how many times as we get older and as we progress, whether it's in business, career, or anything like that, it's this idea of, you can't do that, right? Like you're not supposed to do that, right? Like there's this, and there's these things that you have to go through, or, like you can't do that. Like you're not supposed to do that. But it's like, well, when you're young and you're trying to figure out things, and when you're just trying to serve others, you're like, well, I'm just going to do this thing, right? Who says I can't call Michael Dell, right? Who says I can't call so-and-so? Like, I'm just going to do that. And, really kind of start thinking about that in that way. So that's really awesome. I want to kind of continue to hone in a little bit on what you're doing there. So you had mentioned the Avengers, and you had mentioned, building people up, kind of building that team. So what does it look like for you now as you are doing that in this stage of your career as an elder?
Yeah. Well, I think part of being an elder is, I have a coach that says wisdom is three things: knowledge, experience, and enlightenment, right? And that only comes, unfortunately, for many people, with 2x4s to the side of the head to kind of realize that there's a better way. So, going back to the Avengers and the client scenario, in my practice today, and my early part of my career was really financial systems, operating efficiencies, doing manufacturing audits and due diligence and investment analysis, a lot of very thorough, disciplined approaches. But even what GE&G Capital didn't do, and what I do today, is they were kind of missing the point. And the point was the most important thing in a company is revenue and growth, because if we don't have a client, you don't have a business. So part of my recommendation in that point in my career, not knowing any better, was going to the president of GE Capital and said, I think we're missing the most important part. And they're like, what are you talking about? We're the largest diversified financial company in the world. And I'm like, well, yeah, but if we could just help them grow even 5-10% a year, then that would solve all their problems. And of course, that is true. We have to be operationally, financially good, but we also need to make sure, no different than making sure you can produce a product. How do you go find clients? And so I shifted my whole life and prioritized it on the client, right? The person in front of me, and then working with founders. Like I've been a founder of many companies and building my own companies, and now kind of giving back as an elder, if you will, to help founders who have great ideas, great products, great services, great dreams. But just like you and I, you have different gifts than me, and together we can do more. So how can I come into those situations and really use these tools to listen to clients? Who is really your ideal client? Do you know your client? Right? It's one of my first slides when I get to know someone, like who's the most important person at the company. And it's not a trick question. Sometimes it turns out to be a trick question. Well, the investors are, or the bank is, or the CEO is, right? And the right answer is it's the client, right? Because without the client, we don't have anything. So, I learned that from a child, and that is really the foundational part, that we don't fail the companies. It is true that we talk to people, we talk to companies. That is all true. But what is it about that person, what I call caring and then sharing? Like if I truly care about the person, I'm going to listen, right? And, it's the biggest flaw of most salespeople and other people, right? We talk too much and listen too less. And we should be listening 80% of the time and asking questions for the other 20% of the time, right? So
Yeah.
I think as we go forward, as I help clients identify the clients in the process, how can we serve those clients? Because at the end of the day, everything we should do and can do, if we can take care of that person I know or don't know by asking great questions, really understand known or unknown problems. And they're not obvious. Like some are emotional or spiritual or emotional. Like, man, I'm losing sleep at night because I don't know if I have enough money or I don't have enough sales by the end of the year. So it sounds like, yeah, you have an anxiety. Like that's real. Like that's fear. That's not a side problem. We need to have you have visibility to not having that fear about whether you're going to be able to make payroll in 90 days or not. Or are you going to have enough money for your kids to go to college? Well, let's put together a plan to figure that out. So,
Yeah. Yeah, that is huge. And I hope people caught that yes, we sell, right? Like we're talking to companies, right? We're talking to businesses, but at the end of the day, right, you're talking to a person, and that person, whoever you're talking to, right, it is important. And that can really even be, if you're just in, retail or whatever, right? It
mhm.
doesn't matter. You're talking to that person. And that's a big thing, because I think a lot of times we forget that, because that also goes back and connects to who's the most important person in the room. Well, it's the person across from you. It's the person that you're talking to. It doesn't matter if you're having dinner and you're just getting to know somebody, right? You're at church, you're at a
Mhm.
gym, right? You're in a conference room or something, that
Mhm.
person. And I think that if you walk into a sales conversation, if you walk into any conversation with that idea of I'm going to talk maybe 20% of the time, right? And listen
Mhm.
80% of the time, and just continue asking them questions and just letting them talk. That shows a great, and not just doing it because you're like, okay, well, all right, I wrote, I wrote something down and I'm just gonna, okay, I checked it off. Cool. Right. I talk
Right.
20% of the time and I just no, but you're listening, you're actively listening, because then because now you're thinking, oh, let me ask another question off of that. Oh, let me ask another question. And then you start to get kind of deeper, right? Because it's always that idea of, when you say like, hey, how you doing? And then they're like, well, I'm fine. But then you say, oh, great. Well, what's so, and they're like, well, and then they kind of go a little deeper. And then you find out, oh, well, they're not really that fine, because they're trying to figure out, how am I going to send my kids to school? How am I going to keep my job? Or how am I going to sell my business? Right. All of that sort of stuff. So that's really great. And I think that's really huge. So within what you're doing, within that, building this Avengers team, let's talk about that a little bit more as you're doing that, because how that customer is so unique and how that customer is so important, that you'd said, I can't do all the things myself, because I've talked to the person and I realize, like, okay, they need these other things that I'm just not maybe in my forte. And really, I need to think of who can do that instead of like how I can do that. Well, actually, that's the name of a book. I don't know if you've read that.
Who,
Who, not
not,
how.
yeah, who,
Yeah.
not how. Yeah, of
Yeah. Who,
course
not
I
how.
will. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's so, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are fantastic books. So tell us a little bit more about that, like how you're thinking of building that, and just kind of that idea of building a team instead of this, like, well, I'm just going to go do it all myself, and how that
Yeah.
benefits the customer.
Well, depending on the size of the company and the individual, if we're talking about smaller founder-led companies who started out with an idea, a product, a service, and they came up with the idea, built the product or service, marketed the product or service, sold the product service, and then did the actual work of delivering the service, right? Whatever that is. Um, Going back to our gifting and our processes, we all have limitations. And if I'm only a $1 million a year company and I can't afford 5 people, then you can't afford 5 people. So the goal is, wherever you are, you're exactly where you are. And you can't start what they would say duplicating yourself or replacing yourself, right? The who, not how concept of, like, what is the next hire? Well, one, it comes down to, you got to be at the right place to be able to afford that person. But then what is that person? That's the question, right? So
Yeah.
really, it always starts when I work with smaller companies, and my primary customers are generally founders 5 million to 50 million, but I love working with more early stage growth oriented, particularly, younger clients who are, really have the raw materials and the DNA and the grit, but they just lack the experience. That's a lot of fun for me too, because they're on this journey like, well, I really love doing sales. Well, then do sales. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I really hate doing the books and financing and payroll. Like, well, then let's not do that. Right. So what we're really unpacking as I get to know people really at I'll call it a soulful level, like passions and gifts, right? Because those passions tell you something. Like, if you were going to do one thing, you own the business, you're the boss, you created the vision. What would those things be that you would do for 40, 60, 80 hours a week or 20 hours a week? Right. And then we start moving the person into a plan, right? A plan, because day one, they might not be able to do it. So once again, a career is a lifetime. Businesses aren't here today, gone tomorrow, and they're here for a legacy. But, where do you want it to be in 3, 5, 10, even 100 years from now? And people, sometimes I used to ask that question. Someone 65 in a business, like, what do you want your business to do in 100 years? They're like, dude, I'm 65. Yeah. Right. But the truth is, like, it is going to do something and it can do something. Yeah. Right. But we've got to really understand the founder, the other teammate members. So I generally interview everyone on the team, and I'm really looking for that same thing. There's always the conversation, the right person on the right bus, right? Going to the right destination. If we're trying to go after large companies, federal, state, local government versus small businesses, those are different people. There's no right or wrong people in that conversation. But if you take someone who likes to work with big multi-billion-dollar companies, most likely they are not the person who wants to work with small businesses, and in any capacity, whether it's marketing, sales, operations, finance, even. So really, as we get in and diagnose through our growth diagnostic, right, where we audit and talk to all the people, gifts, capabilities, or ideal clients, like, who are we trying to even serve? And then how do we then look back at the team of who we have, and then making sure we're getting the right people focused on the right things and the right customers. And then obviously, if we grow, we provide even more opportunities, right? So we should, so occasionally some people don't make it through the process. Unfortunately, they self-select or like, I think I'd rather be doing small business stuff if you guys are doing big business. That's wonderful. I can help them find a job in a small business company, right? So it's not about bad people. It's more a function of, how do we really find the passions of the founder, the passions of the team, the gifting of the team. And then we really determine, all right, what's missing? who do we need to add to the team and move things around. And then by doing so, like the Avengers, they go out and, do some pretty cool stuff together as a team.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. It's funny, and this may be kind of off the wall question, but so, you're going through this and you're talking. Have you ever had a moment where you're talking to maybe the founder, and then you're talking a little bit more, and then you kind of realize, you know what? Like this isn't necessarily what he wants to do anymore, but the
Mhm.
team does. What do you do in that sort of situation? Is it
Yeah.
like, well, he's going to go ahead and step back and start like he actually really wants to do this other thing, but he started this, but the other team has kind of like really like, hey, I like they're wanting to do that, and he's kind of like, well, I
Yeah.
actually kind of started to pivot. What happens in that kind of scenario? I know that might be kind of off the wall, but
Yeah,
what
no, it's
happens
not
in
a
that
flaw at
sort of?
all. It's quite frankly every day because,
Oh, okay.
depending on if we're talking about a CEO that was hired to do a job, but if we're talking about founder, visionary people who came up with the idea, it's all about them. It's never about me, right? They're on their own journey, right? They're on their own path. So I'm really a guide. They're the hero. I'm never the hero. What about the Avengers? I am not the hero. I'm like the storyteller and guide that's routing you through the hero story. So whether you're a founder, CEO, whatever that is, it's super important to, once again, I'll call it authenticity, right? Where we're true to ourselves and honest with ourselves. Like, man, I really don't like this. Cool. You're the boss. Like, it's your company. You can do whatever you want, or we can come up with a plan to do whatever that thing is. So a lot of it is, I'll call it soul searching or just clarifying their vision or where there is discontent, friction, misalignment in themselves with the role, the job, the company. They may see a big opportunity they have no interest in, but they know it's a big opportunity. I'm working with a founder now. He created a new company. He is so passionate about it. And I love the guy, but I'll use the word neglect, but he's just not done anything with his cash flow good company. And I'm
Mhm.
just observing this, being curious. I'm like, huh, what are we going to do about that company over there? That's awesome. That has those great people because you're so passionately excited about this thing over here. And it was a function of just like getting to know him and say, well, why don't we go talk? Well, let me go help you find some people to go take care of this company and this opportunity. Let's turn that into something really awesome and special that you don't even need to think about. You just get to know that it's going well and doing well, and that the people that you hired to do it are kicking butt and having a lot of fun.
Yeah, that definitely answers my question because I was thinking, I was like, yeah, so what if a founder, starts this thing and it's going really well, but he's like, well, this isn't, he's started to kind of realize, I don't know if this is necessarily something that I want to continue doing. I have
Mhm.
people that can do it and they're running with it, but I'm kind of pivoting into something else. So that makes sense, right? That definitely makes
Yeah.
a lot more sense of like, hey, we're gonna do because I mean it's sort of like, anything in life really. It's like, well, I've started this thing and I'm really enjoying it, and maybe it's going really well, but it's not really kind of the area that I'm really,
Yeah.
concentrating in anymore or anything like that. So totally makes sense. How
Yeah.
how would you say that, you had so tell us a little bit about that time that you had talked to Michael Dell and you were like starting that because I've always
Mhm.
I found that the last time we were talking really interesting and how that kind of helped shape where you're at. So tell us a little bit about what you did there and then kind of that journey of like, okay, like the things that you learned there is now you're bringing into what you're doing now.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. And it goes back to me learning skills that I was not interested in and analysis strategy. I was given a lot of tools, right? And those tools helped me determine Dell had an amazing business model, but they also lacked a lot of things in terms of services and financing and other capabilities. And so it became obvious to me that, huh, these guys have a tail by the tiger and doing really great things and also need all these other complementary things that we had as a company. So really it was just a matter of this could be an exciting collaboration to do some really amazing, cool things. And when I met with Michael and the team, he said, Joe, everything you're talking about is already in my vision. I know I need those things, but I don't have anyone to do it. Can you come help us do it? Right. So I wasn't like trying to sell him anything was because I was trying to help him and serve him to do really cool and big things.
Yeah.
So that's the beginning process. And then, unpacking that, Michael, we were both 30 years old. We both realized, I guess we were wise enough to know we were 30 years old and didn't know much. We have done things, but didn't know much. So we both had mentors in our life, and we brought other people that were our elders at the time who had been there, done that, and did that. And so that was part of the process. But through that, what I truly learned, going back to really locking this down, is, we had our first platinum accounts program in Council where we only had one Fortune 500 company. And we went and brought 17 companies to a 2-day meeting. And going back to the client listening, none of the Dell people were allowed to present about their ideas. They were there to listen to these Fortune 500 companies as to what their problems, their pains, their issues were. And if they were to create a company, what would it look like? And so obviously that's a pretty good formula for success. So listening to clients is obviously a critical part.
Yeah. I'm just kind of thinking with my business, how many times did I just jump in like, oh yeah, I can do this thing. Right. Instead of like, listening to what they do, because then that also creates problems later on. Cause then you're like, oh, well, you also needed this thing. And then, you also think about just monetarily, I didn't
Yeah.
scope out enough for that. And so now it's time and all that. But that's also something that you find just in relationships in general. It's like, you kind of assume, or the more you listen to what they're saying, the more you listen to, and asking questions, you find out more about their passions and their desires. And then you start connecting more because you're like, oh, I didn't know you played guitar, right? Or I didn't know that you enjoyed reading this, or I didn't know that you like
Right.
doing that sort of thing. And so that really kind of, brings about that. And then also in another way, it's like, hey, well, you should talk to so and so because man, they're talking about that sort of stuff too, and they really enjoy that. You guys would probably really
Mhm.
become good friends, or connect, and in a business sense or anything like that. So that's really cool. So I appreciate you sharing that. So thinking kind of, where you're at and what you've done and all that, what are some, what, if you were to be like, man, I really want to, share this, what is something that you're just like, man, this is a great story, professionally, personally, both, doesn't matter, but you're just like, man, this is a really great story. I learned a lot from this. I want to share this, whatever that may be. What is just a really cool story, just a lesson that you've learned through those encounters, just in through building those businesses?
Yeah. Well, I think the theme obviously still comes back to client and superpowers, and times where either I didn't have the right advisors or people in my network that had unique superpowers that I didn't. So, as we talked about before, after I was at Dell in the early 90s, I was very fortunate financially at that moment that the company did exceptionally well. We grew from 275 million to over 35 billion. That allowed me to look at some new opportunities, and I pivoted into residential commercial mortgage business. And I applied the same disciplines, the same models, using recipes that I was using that were exceptionally great, um, and had tremendous success by the view. We went from 0 real estate agents and 0 brokerages to 6 Keller Williams market centers, and we had 750 agents, and we
Um,
did all that in 6 years. I didn't even know that I could do that, but it took a team. However, we all know, or we've read if we're younger, about 2008 and the mortgage crisis and the housing crisis. And so I had 10 offices in the worst real estate markets in the world.
oh
And my
wow.
revenue sales dropped by 70% overnight. And next thing you know, I'm in a very precarious was not the right word. I was in a incredibly desperate situation,
Wow.
burning unbelievable amounts of cash flow. So all the money and success you would say, hey, wow, that's pretty amazing, was not slowly, was rapidly coming out of my bank account and out of my investment accounts.
Wow.
Um, and eventually that led to a substantial financial bottom in my life and health and some other aspects. And I share that because two things. One is life happens. We can't and are not in control of the world or the market or other people, competition. And so the truth of the matter is, as much as we may be sitting happy and feeling good about things where we're at, the truth of the matter is there are outside issues that I may not see because I'm too close to it. There's
Mm.
outside issues that you may see or an elder may see that I clearly didn't see. Because my advisors at that point in time, I would say were not elders. They were about my same age, 45.
Wow.
And so even with that success, 2008 hits, not one person in my circle had been through a financial crisis before. Not one, right? So lesson learned. I don't like the lesson learned, but I'm here sharing it, which is make sure you have enough people in your network, your sphere, who know you, care, love, and have the experience that you do not have.
Yeah. That has been extremely crucial just in my life. And that's why I always enjoy networking and meeting people like yourself, Joe. I remember when I first started networking, it's all about like, hey, like let's connect and let's talk to, different people and stuff. And for me, honestly, I would say the first year of just me networking and me being in business was just kind of sitting there and kind of taking in, everything that people were telling me, like, oh, well, I did this or, this happened or, I learned this and all that. And for me, really, that was huge. That was extremely huge. Obviously, yes, in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, well, I want to grow. I want to have a business, right? But hearing where people were, how they got to where they were, and ups and downs, and realizing that it's not a straight line up, but it's this up and down. But there has to be this progress of going up. And we may not always see it, but it's really kind of looking back and seeing like, oh, okay, this is where I was and this is where I am now. Look at, the distance that I've crossed and, look at how
Mhm.
far I can go now. If I've done that, man, look at how, what can I do? And so that's incredible. And so I think that just in all aspects of our life, whether it's professional, personally, anything like that, having that person that can speak into our lives is absolutely essential. And I think that that is a great and wonderful advice to have, because it even goes back to what you're saying, is that the other person, right, is the most important person in the room. And having that mentality of going into that, whether you're being coached, whether you're just talking to a friend, a minister, discipling, whatever, anything like that, having that mentality of how can I grow and learn from this is just absolutely essential. So thank you for sharing that, Joe.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Well, and I would just add, just to kind of accentuate what you said, is, I'm older and an elder maybe. And, a lot of these learnings I did not learn until I was in my mid 50s.
Mm,
So, so to the listeners, don't do that. Do not wait to get elders and people in your life that bring unique experiences. And so it's pro growth advisors on purpose, because we are for
mm,
growth. And that growth is not just business. It's business growth, of course. Without a business that's growing, we're dying. But it's
yeah.
also spiritual, mental, emotional growth, because, as we know in our spiritual walk, joy is an amazing place to be.
Yes.
And you can have that. And you can even have it while you're working hard and even when things are difficult. But we can't do it alone, nor should we, right? We were never created to be alone in our own world. I think as a CEO or founder, it's one of the loneliest jobs. You can say, oh, he's the boss. He's got the fancy car in the house and all these things. But the truth is, it's very lonely for a lot of founders and CEOs
Yeah.
that find themselves in a situation of, how did I get here? I have money. And, Solomon, the richest, wisest man in the world, said,
Yeah.
I'd give it all away. So,
Yeah.
we can look recent past to me and others, and we can go all the way to the ancient kings of all great times who will tell you that there is peace and joy in life, that it doesn't always come necessarily or doesn't come from the material things and the businesses. Certainly those help. But at the end of the day, it's really everything that matters to, have a fulfilling, wonderful life.
Yeah. Kind of go back to what we had mentioned before with Dan Sullivan and all that with Who Not How. He also wrote a book, The Gap and the Gain. And
Mhm.
that really also, and he briefly, I mean, he even mentions it in, I think 10X is easier than 2X, but,
Mhm.
instead of looking, always having, what is it, an extrinsic goal. So a goal outside of you,
Mhm.
you're looking internally, but you're looking back and seeing like, oh man, I just, I ran, instead of like, oh man, I still got 100 yards to run. It's, oh man, I just ran 50 yards or whatever, and like, man, that was a lot. I can totally tackle this next, whatever it is. And then
Yeah.
obviously having also have that faith component of, man, I'm not doing this on my own, but I have someone who is helping me, who's just like what you were saying, how we are trying to guide our clients, how we are trying to make them the hero.
Mhm.
We're trying to show them the way, just how we have Christ showing us the way as it's guiding us
Mhm.
in our lives, advising us towards growth. So absolutely wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's so once again, knowledge, experience, enlightenment. Unfortunately, it took me losing everything
Mm,
at a moment in life. And when people hear that, they're like, man, that's really too bad. How did that happen? And yet it is the most wonderful part of my story that I now call my triple PhD, right? Like, I don't want anyone to have my triple PhD and losing everything, but I absolutely want to share, right? And be
yeah.
available. Men, women, companies, founders, individuals to realize that one, we're not alone. And two, it's not all the things we chase sometimes, it's the things where we've come from, because it took that for
Yeah.
me to have really peace and realize that there's a great plan for me and my life's amazing. And I've never had better relationships with the people around me and all these beautiful gifts that have happened in my life. I had no idea was even possible. Right. So even our adversity and challenges, there's opportunity.
And I think it's looking at it through that lens because it's easy to see, okay, well, I just had this horrible thing happen to me, or because of a choice or something that I have done, this horrible thing has happened. And I think that it's easy to look at that and say, like, well, I failed. But it's like, no, it's what did we learn from that? Because if you walk away from that saying, I failed, I give up, and then you're just kind of going away, yeah, honestly, you did fail because you didn't learn from that. You didn't learn from, the you didn't learn from that. And instead of looking at it as a failure, it's something that I always like to say is learn to fail differently. So it's trying something, seeing, oh man, these 10 things worked, but these three things didn't. And it's not like, well, okay, I failed in the sense of like, I'm giving up. It's like, okay, well, why didn't these work? Okay, cool. Now we're learning from that, pivoting, and now we're doing something again. And it's like, okay, well, what worked and what didn't work? Okay, cool. And then just continuing to do that. And it's that idea of just learning to fail differently, trying things, calling Michael Dell, right? Cold calling, sending a note, talking to somebody. Well, whatever that is in your
Mhm.
life, it's learn to fail differently. So yeah, absolutely
Yeah.
wonderful.
Well, I think what's cool about that, and I didn't share I started GE, but what I didn't share is my first job was at GE Lighting, and
Oh,
Thomas Edison, of course, is the story who did the first electric light bulb, right? And he had failed 10,000 times, and at one
yeah.
point in time, his factory burned down to the ground. His wife came out and said, "Hey, this is really traumatic." And he goes, "No, this is great. I get to build a whole new factory with all new equipment." Now, he hadn't even come up with the electric light bulb then, right?
Yeah.
So where had he had been on 9,999 times if he
Mm,
would have gave up, right? And how
yeah.
many times did he try things that ended up being something different? But at least he tried and he kept persisting and gritting. And I think we talk about AI, there's a lot of people that have fear about AI, right? I think
Yeah.
they should be viewing it the exact opposite, because, we are at a potential new gilded age in the world where people can use different technology to do things that were never possible. I'm working on a paper right now called Nova, which is out of nothing, where today, as a business entrepreneur, a person with an idea, with bringing the right team together, can come up with brand new things that didn't exist or improve things that didn't happen before. So I think all of
Yeah.
that, to your point, is when we look backwards, when we're in it, man, it's no fun being in the dirt,
Yeah.
uh, being in the bottom in the hole for sure. But I can tell you that 100% of everything that's happened in my life, the great things and the bad things, have all gotten you and I together to talk today about hope in the future, which is there's so much things in front of us we can do, and that we're all learning and moving forward in life.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great message. And I appreciate that, Joe. Yes. Continue to look forward, look at where you were and look at where you're at now and realize that, what you've done within that and just keep going, even if it's a hard lesson. So I appreciate that, Joe. That's a wonderful, wonderful message. Thank you. Joe, where can they find you? Where, if someone wants to connect with you, if they go to your website, what do you want them to do when they get to your website? Where do you want them to connect with you and how can they follow you?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. My website is progrowthadvisors.com. So feel free to go there, reach out. You can reach out to my phone number, which is also on the website, 512-696-1333. But I always welcome talking to any founders or business people or just people who need help and connecting them through my network of people to help them have whatever their dreams, vision, goals are. If they're struggling with anything, to see who I connect them with to be able to help them.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Joe. Well, we will have all of those links in the description as well, so you can reach out and connect with Joe. Joe, thank you so much for taking your time today, chatting with me. Wonderful. I hope that reach out, connect with, and learn how to fail differently. So thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you, Roger. It's been a joy as always. Take care.